Welcome to Salon Talks. I am Mary Elizabeth Williams, and finally, I have found Prince Charming. I'm so excited to be sitting next to you today. You might know this man better as Rupert Everett. He is an author, a director, a screenwriter, and you might also recognize him as an actor. You've seen him in movies going way back to Another Country, The Comfort of Strangers, My Best Friend's Wedding. We have to talk about that, of course. The Shrek films, where he plays Prince Charming, and Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. His new film, though, is something really, really special. He wrote it, he directed it, and he stars in it. It takes us through the last days of Oscar Wilde, and it's called The Happy Prince. Hi, Rupert. Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you very much.
This is, and by the way, congratulations on the accolades the film is already garnering.
Oh, thank you.
It's been really special to watch it. And this is not your first Oscar Wilde rodeo. You started this journey a couple of years ago, playing him in a play.
Well, actually more than a couple of years ago. It's the rodeo has gone on really for about 11 years, on and off. I wrote this screenplay about 11 years ago, and had no luck in finding finance for it in the UK or in Europe, and then had the idea of trying to perform in the David Hare play, The Judas Kiss, which was on here in the States with Liam Neeson, and is a wonderful play. And I thought, God, if I could play Oscar Wilde on stage, it would be a kind of audition speech, and I could maybe drum up some trade for the film, which is what happened. And slowly but surely, the deadlock kind of undid, and the film began to come together, financially speaking.
And your relationship with Wilde goes back even further, because the title of the film
is really my first one of my first big memories, which is of me and my mum reading books in bed at night as a child. And I think those memories are some of the most comfortable and uncomplicated memories that people have, because the relationship between a mother and child then is absolutely extraordinary, particularly from the child's point of view. My mum was in her Jackie O period, so she had big white earrings and short hair and a little toweling mini dress, and I just thought she was absolutely perfect. And she read this story to me, and the story, you know, is quite an exotic story for children, and also particularly from children of my background, which was extremely conservative, very militaristic. We didn't go to bed each night and saying "I love you" or anything like that. It just wasn't that kind of relationship one had with one's family. So hearing this book about love and the price paid for love and suffering as being the most magnificent thing. Of course, we'd had a little of that in Catholicism, but no one really paid any attention to that, even though we were Catholics. And for me and my mother, it was a kind of eye-opening experience, I think. And I realized, even though I didn't quite understand what was going on, she didn't either, I don't think, in the book, I realized there was something else going on in the world than just the little corner of it that I was living in.
And the story of it, and then you recreate that in a way, in two distinct moments in the film. This bedtime story.
I weave the bedtime story through the film, partly because I wanted to find a parallel between Oscar Wilde's children and the surrogate family he kind of invented for himself in exile. And he did used to tell stories to the little street urchins that he knew, because in exile, his world was a completely different world from the glamorous world of Oscar Wilde, the big star. He replaced all the royalty and the movie stars with lowlifes, with street urchins, rent boys, and petty criminals. And it's a magnificent story for that. And so The Happy Prince going through it is, I think, a great emblem, because the Happy Prince himself is a statue who was covered in gold with jewels all over, that slowly but surely got defaced and ended up being thrown on the dust heap. So that's very much, in a way, the story of Oscar Wilde. But on another level, Oscar Wilde in Paris as actually the first out man in modern history. And when I say out, I don't mean somebody whose family and friends kind of know roughly that something's going on. This is a famous man who could be seen on the boulevard, and everyone who saw him said, that is a homosexual man. It's the first time it really happened, this image and this identity to sexuality. It's quite extraordinary. And for that reason, I think it's a very fascinating story. And in that sense also he was the Happy Prince. He managed to carve his own constitution on the street corner, despite a kind of fairly hostile environment. And even if his old acquaintance used to cross the boulevard to try and avoid him, when he came round the corner and all those little criminals and matchstick boys and people saw him, they would be thrilled, and he would be thrilled too. So in one sense, he was the Happy Prince. He was humorous, he was fun, curious, and he kept on going.
Well, I want to ask you about that because I imagine it's extremely challenging to tell a story like Wilde's, one that many of us feel we are familiar with anyway to begin with, but the idea of this tragedy of him, he was only 46 when he died, and yet this image of him is this just absolutely broken down, sort of frail, elderly man is kind of what we know. And yet you make sure throughout this film that we also see that this is a man of great humor, of great spirit, of great fun, and a man who still has people around him who love him very much. That seems to have been very important in the storytelling.
Yes, I think it's it's central to the story, really. He was not a victim. I think this is an important facet. He challenged the world, even when he was down low, and I think he's very inspiring for that.
Yeah, and his story is so unique because, as you say, he was one of the first really openly gay men in modern history.
The first, and this is not him before prison, because the fact of the matter is he was pretending he was straight before prison. It was when prison outed him, and then his exile, really, only his exile, he was the first. There wasn't one before. The first out man. And
you talk about this in the film. You can really see that it's also a study in celebrity and what happens when someone falls from the public eye. And I think that's been a topic of fascination to you in some of the conversations you've had in the past, the idea of you're in, you're out, you're on top, you're not on top anymore.
Well, like everyone, I'm fascinated, and we're all fascinated by celebrity and fame, and one of the things that is so interesting about it is how blinding it can be. Because you're surrounded by a gang of your own ghouls, really, who just tell you yes. And this is what happened to Oscar Wilde. He was he was called the most famous man in London, and he was so famous that he kind of thought the whole of the world revolved around him, and that's why he made all those terrible, terrible mistakes.
Yeah, and just his wrestling with all of that too is something that you really show, because the idea of being, when you are the first, then you are the person who sets the template, then you are the person who defines it. And you come along, you're born almost 60 years after he's dead, and the same laws that put him in prison
still exist,
still exist until 1967. And even then it's just a chipping away. And one of the things I learned from this film that absolutely astonished me, tell me, say it out loud, when Oscar Wilde received his pardon.
Well, Oscar Wilde received his pardon in 2017.
I want you to say that again, because it sounds insane.
It is insane, and it's also insane that it's a pardon to start with, because since we've agreed now that homosexuality is not a crime, a pardon is not the right thing. There should be an apology, really. So it was impertinent, and it was badly thought out, the whole pardoning of these people, really.
And because it was an en masse thing as part of the Alan Turing.
75,000 gay people.
Right, who were pardoned for the punishments that he was in prison for 2 years.
With hard labor.
With hard labor. And these kinds of punishments existed while you were a child. This kind of...
No, I don't think there would have been prison with hard labor when I was a child. But and probably there wouldn't have also been... Well, I don't know whether anyone went to prison for 2 years. But anyway, it was still illegal.
Right, and you look at what happened to Alan Turing just a few years before you were born.
Yeah, the 50s.
Right, and that, so how has that changed now? I'm curious for you as a man who is one of the, when you were a young actor playing romantic leads, playing gay characters and straight characters, you were really a trailblazer in terms of being an openly gay celebrity. And what was that like for you? Were you've said that there were repercussions for you in your career.
Well, I think, you can definitely say that it's not ideal to be gay and to want to attempt, the kind of world domination that most actors think is their natural right when they start out. We all start out thinking that we're going to be, the biggest star ever. And that really is not, or was not, definitely possible for someone who was openly gay in the 80s or the 90s. In fact, when I did Another Country, everyone said to me, you shouldn't do this film, you shouldn't even play a gay part. Of course, that all changed. And I think one of the problems for me, in a way, after the era of My Best Friend's Wedding, is that suddenly all the straight actors thought, oh, gay parts are quite a good thing, and you can look like you're really acting with and receive tons of awards, which is great. But it didn't go the other way around. The gay actors don't often get to play the straight roles, and I think that's what is finally frustrating and phobic. Phobia is not necessarily violence, it's just a mindset sometimes. And there's a mindset in the kind of, or was a mindset in the kind of boys' club of show business, that while a heterosexual actor could quite easily encompass and embrace everything to do with being a homosexual, it was utterly impossible for them to imagine that the other version was possible as well.
Yeah, and this goes on today.
That's phobia.
Right, and I mean, we've seen this in just the past couple of years with some of these very big films that, how nice that they're taking on these gay love stories, but they're played by straight actors, and yet the idea of having a gay actor play the romantic lead against a woman is still, there's this sense of like, nobody's going to believe it. Nobody's going to go to that movie.
Yeah, but it's not true.
Right. It's called acting, right?
That's a phobia. And it's a frustrating one, because it's great, I think, that the straight actors, essentially, it's great that they get to play the gay parts, but not at the moment, because if we then don't get the gay parts either, we're really out of the whole business. But I'm hoping that at some point we're going to graduate into, everyone being able to play everything. I think it would be great for transgender women to play women's parts, presumably. That would be great. But at the same time, we are also making giant strides. You can't say, when you look in the context of this story, for example, how amazing things are right now. Okay, we are living in a huge hiccup, but in fact, still, I think we have the weight of history on our side and the current of movement that is unstoppable.
I like that, because I was going to ask you about that, because we are living in such an unusual era, both for you in the UK and certainly us here in the US. And in some ways, it feels like maybe we are taking some steps backward. And the fear of retribution for people who are different feels much more ominous than it has in a while.
Yes, but that's, I think, partly because we don't have any context anymore. Our history for nowadays is 2 years ago. So of course everything feels completely black, because you can't see our life now in the context of history. And actually, if we had more context, we would have more pride or more empowerment as a lens through which to look at our new problems. And I think there's a kind of desperation in the problem-solving mindset at the moment, which is actually quite terrifying, because it turns into witch hunts from every single quarter if you don't agree with whichever group you're meant to agree with. So we've got to a point where that you can't even debate things very much.
Yeah, and we were just talking about this earlier. Part of that problem is when everything is done not face-to-face, and we get to hide behind the safety of a screen.
The virtual world, I think, is very, very complex.
And you said maybe you're going to write maybe you're going to give us a guide to good manners on that.
Well, I think it would be. I mean, one of the things I've noticed, I'm not very modern, so I can't read my emails very well, but I noticed that on an email chain, as soon as anyone's got what they want, they just disappear completely. And that gives the other person quite a kind of upset feeling, but it's not really malicious, it's just because we haven't developed a manner system for this new fast-moving world, and I think we need to develop one.
Yeah, especially when now we have an entire generation that has grown up with these devices, yeah. And yet it feels like the adaptation still hasn't come in yet.
Right.
I'm very puzzled by that as well.
Because you notice it on the street in terms of spatial awareness.
Right.
No one has any spatial awareness. There's a ballet on the street when you're coming towards me, that we look at each other. We know instinctively, or we used to know, you went to the left, I went to the right, and we went on our way. That's gone. It's just bump, bang, or everyone's going, they don't know what to do now. So we're losing whole reams of information that we used to have.
Yeah, and that's, well, as you pointed out, that comes back to the loss of history as well, to the loss of context. And so
we've embraced this whole world so without thought. I think that's one of the things that I find.
Rupert, I just had that on the walk over here. I'm sure you did as well when you're having a conversation in Midtown Manhattan. It's the price of coming, just walking down the streets. But watching this film and seeing this story, it's very clear that you were taking pains to tell a different side of Wilde's story and to not just make him this tragic figure. And I'm wondering, as you now begin to put it out into the world and it is seen by generations who maybe don't know anything at all about Wilde, what is your hope for them to take away from that?
Well, obviously that's the most exciting thing, the potential of generational interaction. You know, I think it's a great shame if, you know, the generations peel off from each other as traditionally always happens. And so I'm very keen to try and show my film to younger people, because I think one of the things in the LGBTQ community is this lack of context beyond what happened very recently. And I think context is enormously empowering. The context of Oscar Wilde on the LGBTQ movement gives us a sense of empowerment just to see the distance we've gone from then to now. Also, it gives us an opportunity to a new lens through which to address the problems that we have for the future, which are considerable, obviously, because we could be moving towards a new right-wing dictatorship in America. You never know. There's a Supreme Court, and then in 8 years' time there'll be Ivanka Trump put into the White House.
You're not
It could happen.
You're not making me feel better about things.
So everyone has to be vigilant, but not vigilant, I think, vigilant in an empowered way. I believe that we have the weight of history on our side.
In looking at the long tail of history, I mean, you're reminding me, you know, I remember the AIDS crisis so vividly, and I remember losing friends to it, and now knowing that there are people, my daughter's generation, who know nothing about it, who know nothing about that epic loss of life, this loss of a generation of particularly young men.
Right, so when people think and feel that things are really black now, they're black in context to other blacknesses, and the other blacknesses are quite often more black in a way. So I think, you know, knowing about that is enormously empowering and great.
And this is a very big part of this story. And one of the things that I also love about the film, not just as a work of history, but just as a lovely piece of filmmaking, is I get to see you working side by side with some of the actors that you've worked with in the past. And that's super fun for me, because Emily Watson once again plays your wife. You've been man and wife before in the past. I love A Royal Night Out. That's such a charming, sweet film. And of course, Colin Firth. You're reunited with him 34 years after another
Well, that's
country?
one of the nice things about getting older, I think, in the business, is knowing people for a long time. Emily and I have been married 3 times now, and she is very much my favorite actress. And actually, after working with her the first time as man and wife was when I was writing the script, and I thought, I've got to have Emily playing Constance. And she is just incredible, and Colin also. You know, we go back now to 1984, and that's an amazing thing. And his act of friendship in, you know, sticking with my movie and playing this tiny part, but in playing it, you know, achieving all the finance, because it was all based on whether he'd show up or not, is just the most incredible act of friendship that is not quite so normal in show business of today.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, because the clear long-term relationships that you have, and when you see certain actors or directors and writers who seem to keep wanting to cross paths with each other and create projects again, I'm wondering, if that is something that is now part of the Hollywood or part of the industry experience, or if it's just because everything is so fragmented and everybody's going off to streaming platforms and there is less of that opportunity.
I think everything's very fragmented and it's much less personalized now. Everybody has a slightly distracted look in their eyes because there's so much going on. It's impossible for us to take in everything that's happening. You know, the days when Oscar Wilde rang Marlene Dietrich at 9 in the morning and said, could you come to my set of in the afternoon on the Mexico border, and she rushed over to Paramount and got a hat from Travis Banton and then took a car down and was in Touch of Evil. That whole thing is just gone. And but except for with Colin Firth and me, him doing such an enormous favour, and I think that's a shame because there's a personal, you know, movie making is it's an incredibly intimate business. It should be.
Yeah. And
I think everyone should be, you know, involved with each other as much as possible. But that's the problem with today. Everything is so virtual.
And yet, there clearly this is a moment that now you have been able to get this film made, and you have been able to bring this to an audience, and it is getting all of these wonderful accolades. So I'm wondering now if, having been in this business as long as you have, if you are seeing some upsides to the way that films are being made and distributed now.
Well, there are obviously some fantastic films being made and amazing television. So there's two sides to every coin. I think
Black Mirror.
Yeah, there's amazing things happening, and amazing writers, amazing directors, and so all is not that depressing. I hope, you know, what I would love is to be able to go on and make another film. That's my dream. On the other hand, I'd also be happy just to keep engaged and doing stuff and getting some good jobs.
Well, I'm wondering about that now, because you have your hand in so many different kinds of projects and you've done so many things. You've written books, you've directed, you've been on the stage. So I'm wondering now, what is the next thing you want to do at this moment where now people are looking at you as writer, director, actor?
Well, what I would like to do is try and set up this movie I want to do next. And that's really the only thing I'm thinking about. I'm writing also a book, a third volume of memoirs, and I'm also trying to put together my own theatre season. So I feel what I learned over the past 10 years really is that you have to be, if you want to go on in our business, you really have to be proactive. You can't sit around waiting for things to happen, because in that way the world will simply probably pass you by, unless you're very lucky. So I've kind of got used to now trying to carve my own niche, and so I'm hoping to get all those things together. There's a theatre in a town called Brighton in England, which is a wonderful old theatre that I'm trying to start my theatre season in, and apart from that, you know, just trying to get jobs, trying to up my game a bit.
Trying to up your game. I love it. Well, keep working, because it's really, really fun to see you in anything you do, whether it's playing the voice of a fox in a movie, or starring and directing and writing, and even under the weight of several prosthetics, it's still always wonderful.
No
to see.
prosthetics.
Really? How did you do that? It's all makeup?
It's a mindset.
It's really?
Yeah.
But you had some padding.
I had some padding, but no prosthetics.
That's amazing,
Yeah.
because the transformation of your face, I really honestly just assumed that there was...
No, we would never have had time to put... Prosthetics are very tough things to use, really.
Well, I have even more admiration for the
Because they're
performance.
always going wrong. No, I drank a lot.
Okay, is that the secret? You just immersed yourself in the character.
Yeah.
Did a little liver punishment.
I think I did really just
Yeah.
immerse myself in the character, to be honest.
Yeah, he's a fascinating figure, and I'm sure it was interesting to walk in those shoes yet again.
It was, yes, no, it definitely was.
Now, do you see yourself playing him one more time? Is there another, or you feel like maybe you're aging out of it?
No, I think I've done. I did think, you know, halfway through making the film, when television had suddenly become so huge, I did think, God, it would have been an amazing TV series, and it could have gone on in much more depth, and because there's so many incredible stories and things happen that, you know, you're spoiled for choice, and but I think, you know, I've spent quite a long time with the character, and I have to let him go.
Okay. Well, he was in good hands for a while there. Rupert, thank you so much for joining us. The film is called The Happy Prince. It is all over the place right now, and you should definitely check it out. It is getting all the accolades that it absolutely deserves. Written, directed, and starring Rupert Everett. Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot.